Hello, I'm Natalie Weber with the California High School Speech Association, and I'm here at Delta College this morning to interview Donovan Cummings, who has been a very active member of this association and is currently the historian for the whole state of California. Donovan's been active in speech in this state for more than 3 decades, but actually his beginnings of speech go way back before California's speech program was what it is today. Because he started out back in the Middle West, where, as I did, we both knew that speech was very large a long time ago, even before we came along. So Donovan, I'd like to ask you, first of all, about your beginnings and your involvement, where you were born back
I was born in a little town in northern Wisconsin called Rice Lake, Wisconsin. 2 years premature, and they didn't have incubators then, so my mother told me that those jars for canning, they would put hot water in next to the body and that sort of thing, and I obviously survived. But we moved during the war to Kenosha, Wisconsin, where I attended high school. And my coach there was John Davies, who is one of the original 10 Hall of Fame members of the National Forensic League. And certainly he was the one that put the spirit of competition in me, although my mother was a performer. She was a grade school teacher, and she was always doing performances at the grade school, so I suppose I inherited that, and then the influence of John Davies, and then of course, as you said, I went on to Northwestern University, where you attended. In high school I competed, and
did outstandingly well. Now, don't be too modest here.
Oh, I'm not. Everybody I've interviewed, I'd said, don't be modest, because I knew I wouldn't be modest. I mean, that's not my nature. Anyway, we had a 3-year high school, and I went to nationals 3 years in a row. The first year only because we hosted it, and they allowed the local school to have someone entered. But in my junior year, I competed in dramatic interpretation, and I think I placed 7th in the nation. And then my senior year, I qualified in extemporaneous speaking, original oratory, and team debate, and made the semifinals of all 3 of them, including taking 3rd in the nation in team debate. And because I couldn't attend all of the session,
such.
I received a letter from Bruno Jacob later, the founder of the NFL, saying, you are the last student that we would allow to enter 3 events at nationals. No longer can you. And I ended up making the most NFL points that year of any student in high school.
Well, NFL was, of course, located basically in Wisconsin, where they had a very strong program. And you were able to take advantage of that long before. I know I was in competition in high school myself, but we were not in NFL, so we never had that opportunity to go beyond the state finals.
Well, then when I went on to Northwestern University, I thought, well, I should join the debate team, and I tried out for it, and I made the team. But my interest suddenly went to interp and to drama, and so I did not. I never went to a tournament in college, and then leaving college, I started teaching at a North Chicago community high school for 3 years before coming to California. And then, of course, here in California, 38 years at Edison High School in Stockton, and I think it was 20 years at Stagg High School in Stockton. Not one after the other.
Exactly.
Together.
He's a little younger than
that. I did teach, I have taught 41 years, but not 50-some years.
Well, tell me about your highlights of those years at Edison and Stockton.
The exciting thing is that I guess, and when you talk about things in your career that you're really proud of and that sort of thing, is that Edison High School, where I started, was a predominantly minority school. And my students over all the years, my teams have been predominantly minority students. And that working with minority students and at-risk students and so forth is one of the things that has been the most exciting part of my life, because where I grew up, I had never met anyone who was a minority. I had never met a black person in my life until I got to college. And I had never met anyone who was Chinese or Vietnamese or Filipino until I came and taught in California. And then suddenly I was in a community where that was dominant. And I learned so much, and I hopefully gave something to those young people so that they could succeed in a majority society.
Can you tell us something about outstanding students with whom you've worked at those schools?
Oh, sure. Would love to. I was saying when I was interviewing other people, it's like the Academy Awards, you know, when someone wins, they come up with their long list that they want to name everybody, and I know I can't do that. But I do have a list of 300 here.
Take the top 10.
No, the interesting thing was that my very first year of coaching in California, I had a national champion, and you remember her, Albertha Hillman.
I have a tape of her, which I've played often as a demo.
I never have had a student, I think, that had more control of pauses and intensity in that. And by the way, in the finals at nationals, my high school coach judged her and was the only one that gave her anything other than a first or second. And I think that Albertha was probably the first African-American champion in the NFL in any event. I can't verify that, but I believe so in 1960. And then 8 years later, I had a young man, Ruben Delgado, who won the championship in dramatic at nationals. And since then, I've had some outstanding students, including the young man last year that won the state in oratory and then went on and took third in the nation in oratory as a senior. And as a sophomore, he won the nationals in expository speaking. And is now at UCLA majoring in communications and that sort of thing, and just a delightful young man. Booker Guyton, African-American young man that qualified for nationals in 1963. 20 years later, his son, in 1983, qualified for nationals for me. And Booker teaches here at San Joaquin Delta College.
Remarkable.
And during the period of time here in Stockton, he became a member of the Board of Education of Stockton Unified School District and became the president of the Board of Education. I had a young man that has just graduated from MIT that was a finalist in impromptu at nationals, Joe McQuaid Jenkins. And it's sort of typical of many of the students that I had. He came from a home in which his mother was heavily on drugs and no father. And he was more or less adopted by a family here in town and got into speech, and this just really sort of solidified his work in school. He was a fine student, as I said, went to MIT. There have been some young ladies, Shirley Peppers from back in the 60s, and Felicia Woolfolk, and Elise Chan, and Sandra Lynn Green, all of whom did terrifically in competition. But the reason I mention them is because they're the kind of students that I'm sure you know about, that years and years later would come back and judge for me, would keep in contact with me personally, anything come up, and they're exceedingly concerned about my welfare. And that's the kind of reward that
and somehow you juggled moving from one school to another each day?
Yes, yes. One of the fine coaches from Stockton, Marion Milgren, who was a very top coach, a very top competitor, in the middle 70s, her high school sweetheart, his wife died, and he called her and said he would like to see her again. And she ended up falling in love again and marrying and leaving the profession. Well, there was Stagg High School with no one, and they weren't going to get anyone. So I said, I'll do 2 schools until you find someone.
Until you find someone.
And 20 years later, I was still doing 2 schools.
They found someone.
That's right.
Donovan, in addition to the work with individual students, you also have done a lot with directing as well?
In high school, I've directed plays, directed for Stockton Civic Theater, 13 different shows over the years, and won Best Director and Best Actor in various shows, and directed black theater here on the Delta campus. So, yes. And the unusual thing is that as a coach, because I had a couple of national winners in dramatic, and because I've done a lot of shows and so forth, everybody says, that's what you are as a coach of interp. And yet, as far as the state level, I've had two oratory champions and a couple of second places and only 1 dramatic champion. And I had 2 Lincoln Douglas champions. And I've had finalists at state in every event except team debate. And the one team that I had went the farthest, I think, was quarterfinals and was defeated by your team in Santa Barbara.
Well, those are the breaks.
Those are the breaks.
Which we both know. When you talk about Santa Barbara, obviously we go back to the beginnings of the California High School Speech Association that extended quite a bit beyond the competition that it originated with. Can you tell me something about your involvement in the administration and higher echelon of this society?
Well, I came to California and to what is now the Yosemite Forensic League. And Mary Ritter and Edna Speltz, who were early presidents of this organization, were the head women, plus Ernie Poletti. But they were the head women of the Yosemite Forensic League, and I came in as sort of a raw recruit to California, and here were these two women that were just overpowering, who would at tournaments sit there and yell at each other, even though they were the closest to friends.
Yes.
And Mary Ritter had been a sergeant in the Army during the war, and I was frightened to death. But they taught me very quickly how to adapt, and I became officers of the Yosemite Forensic League, you know, secretary and treasurer and vice president and president, and have served as the district chairman of the Central California NFL District and the North Central California NFL District and the Big Valley, because we changed names as we went along. And then as far as our organization is concerned, I've held almost every office. I mean, I've been an area chair, and I've been the VP curriculum and curriculum coordinator and VP activities and president. And I have to say this because you say, you know, pat yourself on the back, because I feel good about my accomplishments.
Absolutely,
I mean, I'm not,
you should. You have every reason to.
I'm the only one that I know of that was elected for terms 2 different times. I was elected for 3 years consecutively, early 70s, and then early 80s elected for 4 years in a row, and I don't think anybody else has done that. I believe, I can't prove this, that as far as members of the State Speech Council, that I have had a vote in the council more consecutive years than anyone else.
I'm sure that's true.
But no one will ever exceed Carmendale Fernandez as far as the number of consecutive years on the council. There was a period of time when she was the AXA liaison, and she didn't have a vote at that time. But she's always been a member of the council, and I often wonder if she ever goes off the council, will the council cease and desist?
Well, in addition to being very involved in the California High School Speech Association, you were also named one of the earliest members of the Hall of Fame from the state of California for the National Forensic League. And you've mentioned getting involved in nationals, and I know that that's for all of the states, but is there anything you'd like to say about your involvement at the national level that led you to that Hall of Fame honor?
Well, I think that working in TAB, obviously, in the tabulation at nationals, and having many students qualify gets you known and that sort of thing. But I think probably as far as the national organization is concerned, the major contribution that I would mention is that Tom Montgomery, fellow coach here in the Yosemite Forensic League, and I got together and wrote up a system for tabbing speech events at the national tournament that got rid of this ups and downs. And I don't need to explain to speech people what that is, but at the national tournament sometimes in an individual event as it got larger, the ups and downs, you didn't know when the tournament was going to end, when you were going to have semis or finals.
That does create problems.
So we put together a system, and I have to give Tom credit for coming up with the idea that after preliminaries, guaranteeing 2 rounds at a time, not just 1 round. And we worked out a system similar to California's system. I went back to the NFL conference in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and presented this to the people of the conference. And I think this sold it to the National Council, and they adopted the system and have used it ever since. And then I wrote up, again, something similar to our state organization for the NFL districts to use. And I understand the majority of districts now, rather than using ups and downs, use the California system.
And they're very grateful to you and to
So
Tom.
I feel very good about those sort of things. And I was an original member of the CARE Committee, which was concerned with, particularly with coaches and retaining coaches and educating coaches. And I enjoyed serving on that.
And we're talking about the curriculum work that you've done at this level and also at the national level. This is a major achievement that really hasn't been emphasized
I
very
was
much.
thinking back about things that I've been involved in the state level, in the California High School Speech Association, things that I'm particularly proud of having been involved in. And that's number one, is curriculum. I cannot take credit for what's happened in curriculum, the terrific things that have happened. But I've been a part of it.
Absolutely.
Natalie Weber, sitting right here with me, is the forerunner, I think, of curriculum. And you and, what was it Bob Walther? Robert Walther. I don't even know which high school it was from, when you worked, when there was the criteria-based instruction.
1973.
Right. And you and he were instrumental in putting together the framework, which was acceptable at the state level. But I felt I was involved in that and pushing it and being a part of it. I was curriculum coordinator before we had VP curriculum. I was one of the first people to put together a packet of curriculum material to send out to coaches. And then when I was VP curriculum, the curriculum handbook that we put out, now I'm not responsible for that. I didn't write it, but I pushed for it and I kept it going.
And I think that's the important part here, and that's one of the reasons why we think you're quite an achiever for this association, because you have put forth such a tremendous amount of effort on its behalf.
But there's some other things in the organization that I feel I was directly responsible for in one way. You can't no president, no individual on the council, you know, is responsible for any one thing. You have to have cooperation. You have to have people that support it. But I think I was one of the first people that pushed for our results to be more open. For example, the tally sheets in individual events, you know, after putting them out so the coaches can see them, so that this isn't all hidden. And I think
no mistakes.
Right. I think I'm very much responsible for the Hall of Fame, because I believe that a Hall of Fame should come into existence, and I pushed for that. We give an award now to coaches who are the coaches of champions. Well, the NFL started that a long time ago, but I was one that pushed for the fact that there should be. I always think coaches should have recognition. The students are the most important things in our lives in coaching, obviously. But we need some rewards, too, because we aren't going to get it financially.
No.
And so, therefore, we need to give recognition to coaches. I was once the editor of the Bulletin, and I'm the one that changed the format of it. It used to be on the big 8.5 by 11
now
paper.
It's a nice booklet size.
Yes, right. And I was proud of starting that. I pushed for duo interp. It took me a long time because there were those that resisted it, and certainly the NFL's acceptance of it helped. But we adopted it before NFL did earlier in the year, and I think I was instrumental in that. I've been on the rules committee when we first started Lincoln Douglas, you know, writing the rules for Lincoln Douglas and for original prose poetry and for duo. And I'm proud of all those things.
You should be.
And the thing about belonging to the council and being a member over all those years is it's very easy after you've been a member for a number of years to sit back and say, well, I'm going to come and put in my time and then I'll go home. But I've always been active in new ideas, and I'm still alive.
Which is why you have been retained so often.
So I indeed feel very proud of.
Any unusual or different experiences connected to speech that might be interesting for the viewers?
Well, I suppose I could go into 100 of those, but when you try to remember them, they just don't snap back into your mind right away. I know that when I mentioned I went to Nationals in 1963 with Booker Guyton, it was in Texas. In 1963, of course, we had not had the civil rights things.
Yes.
And I traveled with a carload of students with Miss Melgren, and we drove down there. And we got to Houston, and of course we couldn't get into a hotel that night because I had a black student with me. And then when we came back, my brother, who lived in Las Vegas, had made arrangements for us to stay in a motel, and we did. But it was so hot, it was intensely hot, no air conditioning in our car. So we were going to stay an extra night, and we went to a motel and checked in, and the kids went down to start swimming, and I got a telephone call, and they said, is that using the N-word person with you? Get out of here. And we had to check out and leave, which was my first real experience with how...
Well, you said you had never experienced this as a student yourself.
How nasty people can be on the racial level. The young man who 3 years ago won expository at Nationals went to Nationals and forgot his dress-up shoes, and had to go out and find some. And where we were located, he went blocks and blocks and blocks trying to find a store. He had all dark suits, and he couldn't find anything but brown shoes, you know, nothing that fit properly. When Ruben Delgado won the national tournament up in Minneapolis in dramatic interpretation, we started out for the finals, and it poured and it rained. And I mean, that young man was soaked. We had no umbrella and looked motley as far as we were concerned. And then
the wet Cocker Spaniel approach.
Ended up winning the tournament. Personal thing, a couple of things that happened. I was, you know, when you are elected by your fellow coaches into the Hall of Fame, it's a tremendous experience.
Yes,
you
indeed.
know it is.
Yes, indeed.
And three of the nicest experiences that I've had personally was when I was allowed to present you to the Hall of Fame at Nationals.
I remember. And
Ron Underwood and Larry Smith. I mean, because I had a chance to talk about people that I just consider, are exceedingly important. I didn't know I was getting it the year that I got it. Well, our league and it was a year I didn't have any students there. I went back to work in Tab. And all the league members always brought cameras to take pictures of everything. And that night, not a single person that I knew had a camera. And not a single picture of my acceptance of the group in Nashville, Tennessee. You know, that's just one of those strange things that happen. You think of things with students, little odd incidents. I've always had my students at a tournament bring refreshments for the judges. Mm-hmm. And recently, one of my students who is from a family, his father is a doctor, and his mother is well educated, and he flew all over the country for where he wanted to go to college and all this sort of thing. And he decided he was going to bring carrots and dip for the judges. And you go out and buy the little bags of little tenders. He brought in big carrots, not cleaned, with the green on the end of it. What? But that's the kind of thing you remember. Again, a young man of mine made the, I think it was the semifinals in Lions Club. Mm-hmm. And it was at the Ahwahnee up in Yosemite Park. And he and I both were ignorant. We got there for the meal, and there were, 16 forks and spoons. We had no idea which one we were supposed to use. But you learn with students, and that's another marvelous part of experience. And I'm sure there are many, many other instances that one could think of if you had hours to sit back and talk about them. But those just come to mind that are nice things or interesting things to remember.
I think that pretty much concludes our interview.
No, it doesn't.
No.
Because
I was going to... All right, go ahead.
I knew you were going to give me an open-ended question. But one that I need to talk about is coaches that have been important in my life, or as far as the organization and so forth are concerned. And I just, I mentioned some people along the way I have, but I want to emphasize my own coach, John Davies, as I said before, National Forensic League Hall of Fame member. I want to mention Carmendale Fernandez, because I would never have been president of this organization, I don't think, without her support. And she's been supportive of me through the years. After I finished my first term as president, I said, I'm going to get out of this. I've done not out of coaching, but I'm out of the council. And she said, no. You find some other position. Recently, when I was defeated as VP curriculum, because a need for a new, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But when that happens, at the moment you feel a little bit of depression. And she said, I'll see to it that you get into some other position. And I've always appreciated Carmendale's.
When one finds an individual who is as dedicated as you have been, it's very foolish not to,
Well,
because you have contributed so much in such a variety of positions.
And I have to say that out of coaches over the years, that you are one that is on my list of important people.
Thank you.
Because of curriculum, but also because of you as an individual. You know, when you coach, there are individuals that you pick out that their manner, their dress, their decorum is such that you really, and that's always been true of you. I mean, the lady. And as far as the male, do you remember Jack Nolan?
Oh, my, yes.
I don't remember anything else about Jack Nolan, and he contributed to our organization, but he was always so immaculate, and the way that he handled himself was just, you know, so superior. I've mentioned Tom Montgomery, who helped with the national thing, that has been a close friend and has contributed so much. John Cardoza, who is the current secretary of CHSSA. And I went back to the minutes, and there is no one who has been the excellent secretary that John has been. He's contributed so much. Ernie Paletti and Marion Melgren back from the early days in YFL, and Mary Ritter and Edna Speltz, I've mentioned, just outstanding coaches, but they influenced me and helped to inspire me. Larry Smith, you know, you can't talk about the California High School Speech Association and not mention Larry, because as a treasurer, he's okay. As a man, he's magnificent. As someone who cares about speech, he's terrific.
As an educator,
and has written more articles for our bulletin and has been more supportive of speech than, you know, you name it. Bob Jones and his caring about Congress and debate over the years, just a real dedication to it. I go back to Joe Lagnice in the South, and anybody who watches this tape now probably doesn't remember Joe Lagnice, but a power in the South. And he judged me when I was competing in high school and said, I gave you third place or whatever, you know, so I always remember him. Debbie Simon, who is now a coach at Milton Academy in Massachusetts, was an outstanding coach here in California from Lincoln High School here in Stockton. Just created a powerhouse, and then she's moved there and created a powerhouse. Ken Adair, who was a fine young coach from the Modesto area that would have been president of this organization because of his ideas and his foresight and his life, and decided to go into the political field and that sort of thing, you know, so that's his privilege. David Jack, I don't think you could name any other coach in California that when he was coaching knew more about who had won what in what year and what place and how many sweepstakes people. I mean, it was just like a computer with it, just absolutely magnificent. Gay Brasher, who is a coach at Leland High, and at one time, didn't she coach 5 schools over there one year or so?
Very dedicated educator.
I mean, come on, Gay. I coached 2, but she coached 5. But very, very dedicated, and a personal friend, always caring about other people. And that's important in a coach. Tommy Lindsay, who is fairly new to fame in California. I mean, he's coached for a long time, but he's coached at Logan High School and created a team of 4 or 5 students to a team of over 100 students and minority students who just do terrifically. And the first outstanding African-American coach in California that I know of, and he has a brilliant future. Jack Stafford. You know, coming from Del Norte High School, way off there, away from everybody. And the thing, as far as Jack is concerned, as far as I'm concerned, and on the tape he didn't do this, and I'm sorry he didn't, he has marvelous anecdotes about students. Just absolutely marvelous ones that he'll tell you. From meeting to meeting, he'll come with some new story. And I think that's a real contribution. And Ron Underwood. I mean, Ron Underwood now, of all the active coaches in California, has, I mean, in the United States, has the most NFL points. And huge teams that do well at state and national level. And he coaches by himself. He has never had an assistant coach. Never. Now, he has a wife that does his NFL points and does them clean. They never get a red mark. But you know, someone that has been that successful and all on his own. I mean, those are the kind
You're
of people.
mentioning many very dedicated people.
But I say, I know that's a long list, but I just feel obligated to say something about those people. Now, there are many others, you know, the length of your arm that I can't mention.
Yes.
But those people have been important in my life and in California.
Is there anything else you'd like to add before we conclude?
Yes, because I'm told that I have another hour that I can go if I like. No, I'm kidding. I think probably over the years, the things that have happened have been magnificent in speech in California. I think we face some definite problems. And these have been mentioned by other people, but I have to reinforce it. I think the credentialing system in California hurt us immensely because there is no longer a speech credential. And therefore, there are not many speech coaches coming out. It's amazing the turnover in leagues of coaches and coaches who will come in for a few years and then leave. And amen, they come in and take over a program, but the stability that was there before may not be there. We just have to cross our fingers and hope new inspired people will come in.
Not as many have the collegiate majors that you and I had the opportunity to have.
I say, and that's sad, and that's scary. I think debate took a bad turn back in the 70s, where it started to become institutional or institute-oriented and fast-talking, and it hasn't changed as far as I'm concerned. It hasn't bettered itself. And those coaches who coach it would argue with me, and they have their arguments. I'm not saying it's a one-sided issue. But I still believe, as Ernie Paletti said to me a few weeks ago, that our purpose is to teach kids to be able to communicate to anybody and not to a trained debate judge. And so I get disappointed with that. And I stopped coaching debate when it got to that point, when Lincoln Douglas came in.
Debate's lost.
And somebody can say, well, you know, I've read articles and they say, well, you're just lazy. If you don't coach team debate, you just are lazy, or you won't go back and find out the new methods or whatever. Well, I just don't accept the approach of many of them. I think that during the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, when the civil rights movement was on, if you went to the state tournament, you saw such large numbers of minority students, particularly African American and Mexican American students. And I don't think you see as many now. And I think that competitive speech is this marvelous avenue for those students to find their way into what is still a white society in America. I mean, the power still lies in mainstream white America. I mean, that's just the truth. And if we can train young people who do not have equal background to many white students to compete in the world because they can communicate, I think that's so very, very important. And I think the schools that have large minority...
You do turn out the leaders. There's no question about it.
And there are many schools now that send students to the state tournament, particularly students with Oriental backgrounds, Vietnamese and Cambodian and Laotian and Chinese and so forth, that are just outstanding students in speech. And you know that that's going to help them in the future. And I'm not saying it doesn't help white students or Caucasian students, because it obviously does. Look at us.
But you're expanding. We are, as an
and we need to reach out constantly to those young people and make speech important to them.
I think that concludes our interview today with Donovan, and we're delighted that he was able to give us this much time.